just epic. Well, massive good morning. Any Collingwood supporters? Any Lions fans grieving? Anyone not caring? Great. Anyone excited for tonight? Okay, great. Thanks, guys. I'll get on with it then. So, through history, castles have been referred to many things. They've been referred to like as strongholds, fortresses. And the idea of it is that often to be put in places where there was a large area of land of nothing. So it's like wilderness. And then in the middle of it is like a refuge that would put these strongholds or these fortresses or castles. And so obviously in different nations and different cultures and different points through history, they took on different purposes. That's generally the idea of creating a space where there's danger everywhere. There's somewhere you can go to and somewhere you can run where you can find some sense of catch my breath, I'm safe at least for a moment. And it's incredible. Humans have had a way of doing this for thousands of years of building in seemingly horrible, dangerous environments can create these man-made oases, I guess you can call them, where it's like, I'm going to be safe, at least for a moment, until they siege the castle or something, right? That's the idea, but mankind have gone about making these kind of spaces, and we still do it today. We create spaces for ourselves where, in a world that can often seem dangerous and overwhelming and fast-paced and confusing at times, where do you run to? And what are the strongholds that you've built in your life? And we do this in so many different creative ways. The week before last, as we were on a holiday, we took our girls to Noosa Main Beach. And our eldest is 6, she's a pretty good swimmer. And our youngest is 3, Lord protect her. And so she's too confident for her own good. And so we've always gone to like kind of Coventry Beach where there's no waves. It's such a fun place to play. But this time we're like, let's take them, let's see if they want to go on the waves. And sure enough, we get to Noosa. Not only is it packed with people, it's wild, but the surf was pumping. And I was like, they're not going to want to. They've always kind of been very apprehensive about going into the waters. But this time, they were ready. And of course, my youngest will copy her big sister anytime. And so here I go, we're going to have to teach them about surf safety now. And of course, when you're at the beach and there's waves, where's the safe place to go swimming? Between the flags. You got it. So I had to give them a lesson about between the flags. And of course, they didn't want to go between the flags because there are people everywhere and they prefer to be out. But you don't have to teach them about rips and currents and tides and all those things. So, and I'm sure they listened to everything I said. But needless to say, it's like, look, we've created a place in the middle of this beach that is relatively the safest spot. And as long as you stay in between these flags, you guys get the principle. So this idea, it's a man-made space that we had. And I was like, girls, look, the ocean is dangerous. There's waves. And they absolutely loved getting dumped. Who would have thunk it? So for 2 hours, I had a panic attack while I was like, just dear God, please don't let me lose my kids, So here I was, there's one in the shallows getting dumped. She loved it. One a bit deeper getting dumped. They loved it. And I'm just freaking out the whole time. But as long as relatively they stayed within that safe environment, they had a good chance of being okay. And that's what we do. As humans, we create spaces that are going to keep us physically safe. But when it comes to matters of faith, there has been an enduring conviction and belief and promise that in the same ways man can make physical safe spaces to keep it physically safe, God has been that spiritual safe place for all of humanity, irrespective of whatever environment or whatever season you're in. And so you'll see these promises all through Scripture found in not only Christ, but even before the time of Christ. You'll find in our Old Testament all these incredible promises about God being that kind of stronghold refuge for us. In fact, there's this beautiful poem in the book of Psalms that talks about this very thing. There's probably like 50 of them, but this is one of my favorite. It's the 46th Psalm, and it opens in the opening verse. It says that God is our refuge. God is. So if you think about the refuges that we create in our own life, the strongholds that we put in our own life, and they're not bad, the things that we make to make sure our kids have a future, to make sure we feel physically safe, that our future is secure. Here's this incredible promise that God has said that He will be a refuge, a stronghold for your life. God is. He is our strength. He's an ever-present help. This is important to think about. In trouble. Do you have an idea of God that God is only present in the absence of trouble? Like the evidence that God is close to me is things are going well. Maybe you're new to church and the reason you've come exploring faith today and you've got questions about who God is and the whole Jesus thing, is because you've been in trouble. And you're like, can God somehow deliver me out of this trouble? And yes, he can, and we'll touch on that in just a moment, but there's an important other side of the Christian faith to understand. It's God also proves what he's like in trouble. That you can be going through the worst of times and still experience God present with you as a refuge and a stronghold and a castle. And so this was the promise, and it goes on in the next verse. It says, therefore, because of that promise that God is a refuge for us, we will not fear. Now, if you think about it, this series we've been talking about the castle, how to not let messes out there become messes in here. When we're in a world that is constantly bombarded with narratives that make us fearful, and you're smart, you understand how this works with the news cycle and how things operate in that space. So when everything's fearful, when there's so much social anxiety, is there anything that our faith can contribute towards us keeping anxiety out there and not letting it get in here? So therefore, we won't fear. Even though the earth give way, the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, and even though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging, even though. Not saying we will not fear as long as God stops the oceans and stops the mountains and stops the trouble. It says even though this stuff is going on around us, we will not fear. It goes on a few verses later and says the Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our what? He's a fortress. Get that imagery in your mind. God is a fortress. He creates a space for your life in the middle of a dangerous environment. And here's what's important for us to understand is God doesn't just make himself known by ceasing the storms around us, but by holding us in the storms. No doubt about it, God is a storm ceaser. And that's one of the reasons why we intentionally pray for things. God has promised that he knows our needs, he cares about meeting our needs. And if you're in a storm right now in your life, whatever that looks like, the good news is you have a God who fights for you, a God who intercedes in your behalf, and then you can turn to. But that's not the only time he shows himself true. Scripture would tell us, Jesus would show us that God's also present by holding us in the storms. So when I was talking to my girls at the beach, here's what I said to them. I said, all right, we're going to be in the middle of these two flags. You're going to be standing here, right? Now, you're probably going to be pushed aside here, and when you get dumped, you'll lift your head up from the waves, and you'll be somewhere else, and there's people everywhere. There's always those kids who bring their bodyboards in the middle of the flags. They are like dangerous as, and I kept my integrity and didn't say what I really thought. And so that was all happening. So here's what I told my girls. It says, here's what I want you to do. When you panic, if you get up from being dumped on a wave, here's what Daddy will promise you. I will not move. Like, I will. I mean, if you're in danger, I'm going to come to you, but I'll be in this spot. I'll be right next to the flag. Keep your eye on me. So when you're looking around, don't think I'm going to be out in the ocean or out back at mum sunbaking, enjoying her time by herself on the beach, getting tanned up. True story. Get your eyes on me. And this is why I love this psalm goes on and says this. So that it says, therefore, because of all this, because God is someone who's a stronghold, because God is someone who's present in our storms, because you don't have to fear, this is what God says, be still and know that I am God. Do you ever allow yourself space and time and margin? In the middle of all the roaring waves, this is what this psalm was saying, and all of though the mountains should fall in the sea, and though the waves roar with their roaring, when are you ever just still? To just remember in all of this, to go, hang on. I'm not God, and I'm thankful for that. I would make a mess of things. He is God. To just be still. Now, this is counterintuitive, I think, to our culture, our pace of life, the world we live in, maybe just your own family life. The idea of being still. It's like, I'll be still, but how long? Because I've got something else to get to, right? Hurry up. How long do I have to be still for? Just until you know. Until you're reminded in all the toing and froing of our lives that God is for you. He's present. He hasn't shifted. And you might get up from being dumped by a wave. God will not move. He is present. He's faithful. He's consistent. So at times we need to be still. It's what someone running to a refuge would be like. They're in a dangerous wilderness environment. They finally get to a refuge. What can they do? It's like, oh, I can finally catch my breath. It has been dangerous out here. And this is what we're invited to know God. Now, contrast that with this dynamic that we all experience. We set up our own strongholds in our life. We set it. That's what we do. We're people, and this isn't a bad thing. I think this is one of the great capacities that God has given humankind, is we're able to create systems and structures, infrastructure, institutions to help, keep us safe. We create strongholds. Take, for instance, like our medical institutions. The founding of them are super important. This is a very, 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 very brief overview of our health systems, but once upon a time, people lived in their community, and you might have one person who knew something about a plant and could help you, and that might be it. But then someone visits your town, and they let you know about some other medicine or some other ways of setting a broken, limb in place. And eventually, all these communities pulled all their medical knowledge together, and we created institutions, health services. Like I said, I just jumped through about 3,000 years of human history to the modern era. But this is what humans have done a great job of. We're like, how can we create structures and forms and environments that are strongholds for us? We create governments, we create economies, we create airplane timetables, But here's the problem, right? Eventually, sometimes those strongholds get breached. I had a mate who was flying from Manila to Sydney this week. The flight was supposed to leave late at night and had 3 young kids. It was delayed on the tarmac for 4 hours. I'm not going to say what airline it was. They can defend themselves. But what happens? We make our plans, we have our systems, we have our structures, but then those strongholds are often breached. It's life. It happens to us. And we look around the world we're in an incredibly anxious world. We're anxious of war. We're anxious of economic disasters, pandemics, political corruption, increasing polarization. I could go on. So at times we look around, what is it? Because we recognize our systems and our structures aren't perfect. No matter how wonderful we are as a human species, we create all of our strongholds, but they're constantly breached and they constantly fall apart. Doesn't make them evil or wrong. It just makes them flawed. And so my question to us is this: can faith in Jesus help us prevent then the storms around us from becoming storms within us? When our strongholds that are breached, the strongholds we've created, maybe you had a plan for your life, a plan for your future, a plan for your family, a plan for your finances, and then something went wrong and your stronghold was breached. Is there something in our faith that can still prevent those storms around us then from becoming storms within us? And I think this is a very important question for us to ask, because Jesus himself warned his own followers. Jesus warned his disciples that any one of us can become victims of wandering off from being between the flags. That any one of us can be tempted to wander off from keeping our eyes focused on God, who is our refuge, and God, who is our fortress, and God, who is our stronghold, and try to put our hopes in life on man-made strongholds and man-made structures. And Jesus kind of gives this warning saying, be warned, your people, no matter how good you think I am, no matter how much you trust me, there's always going to be temptation that you can go away from trusting me as your stronghold and kind of turn towards other strongholds. And in fact, on the last night, when Jesus was on the earth, he had dinner with his disciples. He sat down and warned them of this very thing. And Matthew, who was present at this dinner, Matthew, one of Jesus' first followers, he records the conversation as follows. Jesus told his disciples, there was 12 of them in the room, he said, this very night, how encouraging is this? You will all fall away on account of me. I know you've seen me do miracles. I know you've heard me preach incredible messages. I know you've seen me even raise the dead. But tonight, you're all going to wander off from between the flags. Even though I've taught you, I've shown you, I've been loving to you, I've been consistent, you're going to wander off. And Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, not me, I would never do that. I'm not that guy. I've got my Cert 4 in surf survival. I will not wander. And Jesus answered, this very night, before the rooster crows, so before dawn, you're going to deny me. You will disown me, not once, not twice, 3 times. So Jesus looking, keep in mind, these are the guys who were there, who knew the sound of his voice, who knew what he looked like. These are the guys who recorded what then is included in our Bibles. Like, if there's anyone that knows, if there's anyone who should trust. But Jesus is like, this night when I need you the most, you're going to fail me the biggest. You're going to wander off. You're going to deny me. Have you ever looked around maybe at customs or trends in our world and gone, man, even if everyone goes after that trend, I'm not going to do it. No way whatsoever. So, for instance, Crocs, the footwear. I was adamant, even if this whole generation goes after them, I will never. I gave in. They were a gift. I cannot wear them in the presence of my wife or in public. Yeah, they've become my gardening footwear. But what is it for you? I will never get a mullet. Everyone else can. Or hands up if you're wearing R.M. Williams this morning. You sold out, Here's my point. What am I saying? You might look at Peter's outright denial and go, I would never. Peter's like, I'm not going to deny. Everyone else might do it, not me. But here's the thing, as much as we go to that extreme, I would never turn my back on God. And again, you might be new to church here and you might turn my back on God. I don't even know if he's real. So I get that tension for you. But if you're a Jesus follower, you mean I would never deny Jesus. But here's something, and we're going to look at this morning. Before Peter outright denied Christ, we'll find that 3 times Peter neglected Christ. Just subtle moments where he turned. It's like he wandered off from between the flags. And so we look at it and go, surely God, I wouldn't get it caught in this or that. That won't become my story. But if you've learned anything about being a human, surely you know that most times problems out there becoming problems in here don't start with some big wave that just hits us out of nowhere. It's little compromises here and there. It's little drops of the ocean here or there. It's a little, let that for a moment. And then one day you're like, my life, I didn't think it would happen to me. My home, I never thought that happened in my mind, my body, my faith. Not me. I was adamant, not me, Lord. Because you're like, it's too easy. The big waves, you can avoid them. But when are those little compromises of a little bit of time, those little bit of wanderings? What do they say to my daughters? I said, girls, listen, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get up from being dumped in a wave. And what will happen is you'll slightly move. So every time you get up, look up, straight back at dad. It'll keep you aligned in between the flags. Because most times where people get lost, it's not because they intentionally ran away. It's because there's those little bits of neglect. And maybe you found yourself here today feeling like, how have I got myself into this mess? Why does God feel distant? Or why does my life feel like a mess? Or why is my life out of order? Why are things confused? How did I get myself into this mess? Doesn't mean you're evil or you're a bad person. Sometimes it just happens a little bit by little bit. And so here's what I want to do today as we finish this series. How can we identify if we've swum outside the flags? 3 things I want to look at today that will be little cues for you that you can get back. And irrespective of how far you think maybe you feel like you're caught in a rip, in a current, and you've been trying to swim against it and you're exhausted, then you're in exactly the right place today. I'm going to believe by the grace of God, you're going to experience together what it is to experience God as our safe refuge and our stronghold, even though the waters might be bellowing and the mountains might be falling into the sea. So before Peter denied Christ outright, after Jesus predicted this, they went on to a place called Gethsemane. It was a garden just outside of Jerusalem. And the scene was weighty and heavy because Jesus knew it was coming. Jesus had already predicted his own death and obviously as well subsequent resurrection, but this was the moment. This was the night where he knew he was going to confront not only the physical torment and pain of a Roman crucifixion, but also the spiritual burden and weight of carrying on his shoulders the sin and evil of all humanity. So knowing what was coming, Jesus turned to his disciples as they were alone in this garden and said this. He said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. So if you've ever felt like that before, this is why turning to Jesus as your refuge and stronghold is so important, because he understands what it's like. He says, I've been overwhelmed to the point of death. So would you stay here? He's saying this to his disciples. Would you stay here and keep watch with me? So Jesus went off and prayed, and he prayed. And as he came back, it says a few verses later, he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Have you ever fallen asleep before, like during a movie, or you've even been trying to do something noble? Maybe the person next to you this morning is already sleeping. You got to give them the little nudge. Hey, wake up. Someone once apologized to me for falling asleep in the middle of a sermon. And honestly, I said, you don't need to apologize. I'm stoked. You could have been sleeping at home, but you chose to do it here. I feel very flattered. Thank you. So Jesus said, couldn't you men keep watch with me just for 1 hour, he asked Peter. And then he goes on and says this. He says, watch and what? And pray so that you do not fall into temptation. The spirit's willing. You have enthusiasm for this. And maybe that's your story. Your spirit's willing. You want to make wise decisions in life. You want to make sure that the messes out there don't become messes in your life and in your marriage and in your home and in your business. You have a willing spirit, but Jesus calls it out. You are human though. Your flesh is weak. You're not perfect. Things will go wrong. He says, so here's the solution. You need to intentionally be on your guard and you need to be prayerful. So here's the first warning sign that you may have wandered outside of the flags, is you're neglecting prayer with God. Neglecting it. I don't want to dig too deep into this because we did 4 weeks on it only a month or two ago. So if this is an area you want some really great practical tips for how do I go about starting prayer, how do I go about maintaining prayer, going about prayer, please listen to our series called Prayer for Grown-Ups. And also, if you just want to be around people who pray, we have so many prayer meetings in the life of this church. We even have 2 on Sundays if you want to be a part of it. We have a couple on Thursday. We have them through the week. People do it in their groups. If you need to learn to pray, want it to be reignited and a passion for prayer, we have so many practical avenues for you to get involved with. But here's what I want to remind you of when it comes to prayer. In prayer is where you and I filter out most things that would corrupt our lives. Let me say that again. In prayer is where we usually filter out most of the things that would corrupt our lives. I find myself, if I'm anxious or angry or worried, Chloe's like, go for a prayer walk, get out, go. You need to pray. I need to filter this stuff with God. Because, there's some things that your better half or your friends or your roommates don't need to hear you whinging about. There are some things that God's like, pour it out on me. I can handle it. Don't hurt the people around you because you haven't filtered out the stuff that you're navigating. Filter it out with me. Prayer is the way we can do that. In prayer, this is super important. In prayer is where we make space to discern what's happening, not only in our lives, but in the lives of those we love and have responsibility for. So if you neglect just creating some space in your life to pray, it's like the little wandering happens. So for instance, I'm a parent and I'm learning how to parent my kids. And so, and if you've been a parent, if you are a parent, if you want to be a parent, your life's busy, there's just stuff to do. So when everyone's asleep in my house, when everyone's finally going to bed, I go and sneak outside my kids' rooms and I sit there. And sometimes it's just for literally 60 seconds. And I'll just give space and time to listen to God speak. Because anything I need to be aware about what's happening in my kids' lives. Is there anything they're learning at school? Is there anything they've had with a friend? Have they seen anything on television I'm not aware of? Are they scared? And I just sit and I create some kind of space to discern what's happening in my children's lives, what's happening in my life, what's happening in my wife's life, what's happening in your life as my church. I just create that. When we neglect that kind of stuff, it's so easy then for just the mess and the busyness to just get in our world and we wonder, how have I got here? How am I so outside the flags? Maybe you just neglected something as simple as making time to be with God in prayer. In prayer is where our priorities are realigned daily. In prayer is where we keep the embers of our faith alive instead of just outsourcing that to your poor, humble pastor. You can do it yourself. In prayer is where we find an outlet for the practice of gratitude. And here's my point. Prayer ultimately creates space for us to hear God speaking to us. You often think, and maybe if you're new to church and exploring this, maybe your idea of prayer has been you just asking God for stuff like Santa Claus. Give me. One of the most amazing things that you can do when you come to pray is don't say a thing. Just create room and space for God to speak. He's always speaking. Do we create time to listen? It's why, again, I come to the verse we read earlier, Psalm 46, verse 10. It says, be what? Just be still for just a second. Listen, God is so, that's why I don't want to put any big rules around this, because I know your life is full on. There's tons going on in your life. But this does matter though, because there is tons going on in your life. So you need to fight for some measure of prayer in your life. You might not know the first thing to do. I can promise you, maybe being still, as radical as that sounds, is a great first step. To be still for a moment and just remember, know that he is God. Just be still for long enough to hear him reminding you, I love you. I'm present. Stop scrolling for a second. Stop watching for a second. Stop talking for a second. Stop drinking for a second. Just stop for a second and be still just for a moment enough to finally hear the voice of your Heavenly Father speaking to you, reminding you that he loves you and he's for you. And if you think that's a radical idea that you can hear God speak to you, listen, if you have already made the transition to believing in God, that he's the one who created the heavens and the earth, then surely the step to believing that he can actually speak isn't that much of a big step. He can make everything, he can speak to you. So just be still long enough. In fact, there's a wonderful confronting quote written by William Shannon. It says this: wordless prayer is not an effort to get anywhere because we're already there in God's presence every single day. And we talked about this last week. Where is the temple of God? You're the temple of God. He's around. He's here, right? It's just that we are not sufficiently conscious of our being there. And so sometimes you get your head up from being dumped by a wave of life and go, I'm outside the flags. What does prayer do? Prayer brings you back inside. God being your fortress, God being your strength. The story goes on. Jesus is kind of calling out his guys, why couldn't you pray with me for at least 1 hour? And then eventually, Jesus is like, look, prayer meeting's over. A rabble of soldiers are here to arrest me. And they come to, in the dead of night, Judas, who was one of Jesus' disciples, betrayed Jesus by giving heads up to all the soldiers at this point where Jesus was hiding out. That's why they're able to find him. Instead of arresting him in broad daylight for everyone to see, they didn't want to do that, so they did it in secret. And this is the next part where we see Peter not yet deny Jesus, but simply neglect Jesus. And here's how the story goes. It says, these men stepped forward, and they seized Jesus, and they arrested him. And with that, this is pretty cool. Not in a good way, but like for storytelling purposes. It says, with that, one of Jesus' companions reached out for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, who was one of the soldiers, cutting off his ear. This is one of Jesus' followers, right? Had a sword on him, straight away turned to violence. Here was the moment Jesus is arrested. Jesus, I got your back. Now, we wonder, who could this companion of Jesus possibly be? Matthew says a companion of Jesus. Mark's gospel says a companion of Jesus. Luke's gospel says one of the disciples of Jesus. John, who was the last disciple to write a gospel, went, it was Peter. And he wrote it down. Yeah. It goes on to the next verse. It says, Jesus said to Peter, put your sword back in its place. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Here's, I think, the second warning sign that we have drifted or swum outside of the flags, is that reflection is replaced by reactivity. We definitely have to throw that slide up because it's a complicated sentence. We can be, you know that you've swum outside the flags when you're overly reactive to everything. And this is often a warning sign that I've let too much of the anxieties out there become anxieties in here, is I'm always reactive to things instead of reflective. Instead of being able to hold my tongue, hold my emotions, have a bit of self-control. And here's the beautiful thing about Christian practice. Christian practice helps us to process life storms, hear me, in healthy ways rather than dysfunctional ways, like cutting off someone's ear. Now, you might not do it with a physical sword, but how do you know we can often cut people down with our words? I'm going to say that again, because there is life and death in the power of my tongue and your tongue. You might not physically react all the time to people, but how often do we say things we wish we could put straight back in our mouth? And that is often a warning sign that I've let too much of the messes out there become messes in here, that I'm overly reactive and way less reflective. Now, let me kind of give you a few facts. Given the highly networked world we live in right now, always connected, always plugged in, always aware of what's going on everywhere in real time, at all time, all of the news sources, all of the devices, I'm conscious that even the most committed Christian in this room will consume only a fraction of the information and input from your local church compared to what you consume every day via podcasts, YouTube, Netflix, anything else. Today, the average churchgoer will Google a problem before they approach their pastor. I know it to be a fact because there's a guy a couple of months back, first time to church, and at the end of the service, he prayed a prayer, and we'll make time for that today, to follow Jesus, put Jesus first in his life. And next morning when I woke up, I had 2 messages waiting in my inbox from him. The first one said, and the reason there were 2 is because I was asleep when he sent them. So he wrote the first one, which said, hey, this is awesome. I've experienced Jesus for the first time. I'm curious. I really want to stop my recreational drug use now. I really feel like challenged. I don't need drugs anymore. I found Jesus. So how can I go about no longer being on drugs? But because I was asleep, I didn't get it. And so when I woke up, I had that message and then a follow-up message. And the follow-up message was, don't worry about that. I Googled it. I figured it out. So I was like, job done. I'm tapping out. But I'm conscious of that tension now. We digest so much. Here's my point. We consume rather than contemplate now. We're always consuming. Whenever do you pause long enough to stop consuming information, to just contemplate your life, contemplate God, to look up again, where is he, where's the flags? And we're reactive rather than reflectionary. We don't take time in prayer, group life, worship, scripture. Now you do. You guys are here. You're doing awesome, okay? This is where I think it's so important for us to be still and know that he is God. When I was 19, I had a big moment in my life where this all kind of came to a head for me. I dreamt about being in a professional band. Now, listen, I'm going to give you an insight to my upbringing. Please don't tell anyone about this. I feel like we've got the kind of relationship now where you're not going to judge me. Deal? Everyone online, deal? Thank you. Like Canberra doesn't know about this yet, Canberra, so don't tell them. My dream, I just wanted to play in bands. That's all I wanted to do. A long story short, my first year out of school, pretty much most of my time outside of I was doing Bible college at the time. I was obviously helping out in church life, but I devoted all my time to be in this band. And doors started opening, opportunities started opening. We won a major national competition and was streamed, onto free-to-air television, all those things. And so doors started opening, contracts started opening. It was a very exciting moment to be in a band. And, and we all got into the band originally for great motives. We wanted to make Jesus famous in the world. We wanted to make a difference. We wanted to be a positive influence on culture. But, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. And as time rolled on and a bit more notoriety happened, and a bit more, look, we were nobodies. But in our little sphere, we felt like we were becoming somebodies. The little bit of creep, a little bit of the agendas out there became agendas in here. A little bit of the taste of things out there became taste of things in here. A little bit of that, we'll never be that kind of band, started becoming that kind of band. And it was a specific day, I'll never forget it. I don't remember the specific details of the conversation, but I obviously had said enough for my dad to pull me up and go, hey, you've become the very thing that you said you'd never become. And I felt like I was Anakin and I was talking to Obi-Wan, where he said, you become the very thing we sought to destroy. Anyone? Yes! Woo! Sorry, I digress. I don't often get quotes that land, but that kind of landed. And I ruined it by affirming myself. I locked myself away in my room for 3 days because we were making plans to move overseas, being based, in the big leagues and give it a shot. And all of a sudden, it was right. Like, I realized there are so many, and it just happened drip by drip. My attitudes, my convictions, my boundaries, my words, my attitude, my pride, my priorities, it all crept in. And so I took time. I was reactive at first. I'm not that. And I was like, I'm going to pause and reflect for a moment. And I spent 3 days not talking to any of the guys in the band, Because this is a big deal. This is like you're 19, right? These are like those crossroad moments for your life. You're like, this could determine so much of my future. And as I took time to just contemplate who I was and what had happened, I was like, dang, I'm outside the flags. I loved God, but our flesh is weak. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience of like waking up one day and going, there's distance between me and God now. And it might feel like a great chasm at times. You're not that far. The story goes on as they arrested Jesus. Jesus healed the guy's ear, and that's a story in and of itself. They walk on, and Matthew continues the story by saying this. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had been assembled. So they're all there, right, ready to convict Jesus. It says, but Peter, he followed him at a distance. I learned this in my life, that I might be following Jesus, but at times there can be distance. And there's one moment where one of my daughters got up from being dumped by a wave, and the next minute I saw her. It's like there was just a little bit of extra distance. And I was like, come back, listen to my voice. And here's that third, I guess, warning sign that you've drifted out from the flag, is that we've lost closeness to Jesus. Losing closeness to Jesus. I don't know how to put it any other way, but maybe that explains how you feel today. That it's just not close. And you're here, you're ticking the box, and you've rallied the family, and you've got in the car, and you're in the room, and that is a great thing. But if you're real, you're like, yeah, the skepticism, the doubt, the fear, the worry, it's all got in, and it's somehow created. I feel like there's this divide. Have you ever experienced a long-distance relationship before? Like, they're fine, but they're not fine. Have you ever tried to maintain something that's healthy and vibrant and life-giving and fun with some sense of connection? And you try everything you can. When there's distance, you're, on the phone, you're writing letters. Actually, that'd be a pretty romantic thing to do if you're doing a long-distance relationship. But, emails and sharing memes probably is how people connect these days via distance. But it's like you're always on catch-up. You know what I mean? You're not there. There's distance. And so there's like long-distance relationships that have a frantic pace about them. It's just never, you always catch up. It's like, okay, we're in the room. What did I miss, God? Let me catch up this week. Okay, I'll check in again. It's like, there's distance. And you've let the frantic pace of our culture, you let the fears of our culture, you've let the priorities of our culture get in and cause this seemingly distant. Peter was following Jesus, but there was distance. Maybe for you, if that's where you're at today, maybe that's a warning sign for you that you've drifted outside of the flag. You love Jesus. And you can see him, you're for him, but there's nothing intimate. There's nothing close. Well, I want to create a moment today to not be frantic, to not run off. And as we've been reading all morning, to be still and to know that he is God. And so for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to ask, I know we've got places to be. I know you've got things on. Your life is so important to God. And if there is distance, if you feel there's distance between you and him, heck, maybe you've never even recognized that God's even close to you. And this is a whole new idea. The next few moments, I don't want you to check your phone. I don't want you rushing out if you can. I know you got kids. Do what you got to do. But if you can, here's a moment. I just want us to be still. You can close your eyes. You can pray. You can write down thoughts. I want to give you a moment to look up from the waves. Maybe you've been dumped a few times. To see where you are and to look, where is God again? He's right in between those flags. He will not move. He's consistent. He's faithful. And he's calling you out. Listen to my voice. I'm here. I'm close. So for the next few moments, let's be still. And let's know that he's God. I'm going to pray. And if you're here this morning and you recognize that there has been distance, this is a moment I'm going to believe for that gap to be closed. You'd be connected in to closeness with Christ. But my heart really is deeply for those who have never known what it is to be close to Jesus. And you've never known that you could be in relationship with him, and you can. And you've never known that he's invited you to follow him, because you can. As I pray this prayer, I'm going to ask everyone to repeat this prayer out loud with me. There is something important and practical about praying out loud together. It's not like this prayer is a magic prayer. It's just a way that together we can confess our need to be right with God and our desire to want to receive his grace and his love and his invitation for us to follow him. And so if you've never prayed before, if you've never prayed to be right with God and to follow Jesus, this is your moment to do that today. So could I ask us all out loud with one voice, whether you've prayed a prayer like this 1,000 times or whether this is your first time ever praying this, I want us all to pray this and make it real and make it personal. Can we say, Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for coming close to me, bridging the gap that my sin had made. Thank you for sending Jesus to make a way for me to know eternal life. And I want it now. I make my decision to follow Jesus, to be close, to make him my refuge. So God, over these beautiful, wonderful, much loved people, be their refuge. Though the mountains may tremble, though the oceans may roar, may all the turmoil out there, may they find rest in here, because they've made you their stronghold and their fortress. And I pray this in the name of your wonderful Son, Jesus. Amen. God bless you.